Why don't hi-fi systems sound like real instruments? Man, I'll tell you what, that's a question that's plagued me for decades, maybe longer. A lot of decades. Andy in Ann Arbor, Michigan asks this fabulous question. Even expensive systems don't sound real enough to trick listeners into thinking there's a live singer or instrument in the room. At least not any of the ones that I've heard. Well, me neither. On rare occasions, but we'll get to that. Maybe I need to go to the Rocky Mountain Audio Fest. Yes, you should. It's coming up in October. I just spent a couple of hours listening to a piano recital, and I decided to close my eyes to see if I could figure out what makes the sound of a live piano so different from a stereo. I decided that, at least in this case, it wasn't imaging because the piano sounded like it was coming from the particular spot in the hall. The clarity of the sound didn't seem to be different. It wasn't louder than I've heard played in hi-fi shops, and it certainly didn't play at frequencies outside my audible range. But it had a fullness or a richness or complexity of tone that just doesn't seem to fill out very well when played back on electronic equipment. Do you think there's a single big factor that most audio equipment fails to reproduce that prevents it from sounding more like live instruments and singers? I don't think there's a single element, and if there were, I believe it to be dynamics. There's a bunch of things going on here. First off, and this is very complex, and I don't intend to spend hours talking about this. I'll just give you some brief overviews because, as I said before, this is a problem. This is probably the single biggest conundrum on my mind and has been for decades upon decades. I hear live music in the oddest of places coming out of windows. I can always tell. I'm not talking about concert. Where there's a busker playing in a subway or in an airport, and I've reported on this before. And I hear these live venues, and I can always tell it's live. Yep, it's live. And I come around the corner, there it is, live. So how does that happen? I used to think it was the microphones because that's an obvious place where the first, we hear with our ears, but we have to have a microphone in order to capture the sound of someone's voice. And that microphone is going to somehow color in a whole bunch of ways what's being recorded. But while I think that is part of the problem, I don't think it's really the issue because I can also tell the difference when somebody is playing an electric instrument like a guitar or a bass through their own amplified setup. In those cases, I can tell if it's live or if it's been recorded. Now there, we know the recording process, if we use digital, can capture the lightest sounds from something as light as an atom striking your eardrum to the sound of a jet engine standing next to your ear. That's what 120 something dB is. And that full range easily captures all of that sound. So it isn't the recording process. I doubt it's the microphones. And so what could it possibly be? Well, I think it's a combination of things. And here's what I'll hit on, the highlights. Dynamic range. Very, very few loudspeaker systems can capture and reproduce, or not capture, but can reproduce the full dynamics of an orchestra, which can hit 124 dB, 125 dB. Not many speaker systems can do that. There are some very efficient horns that can, but those always sound a little colored to me, or they have other problems, but they come about as close as I've ever heard. So very efficient loudspeakers can at times sound very much like live music. And I have once or twice been fooled by very efficient loudspeaker systems into believing that there was a real live instrument being played in the room. That's as close as I've ever gotten. And I've heard thousands of systems all over the world. And yes, I've been to the Rocky Mountain Audio Show many times. So I think one of the biggest things is the unfettered dynamic range ability of the loudspeaker and the system driving the loudspeaker. I think that is a really big key to it. The other part is the loudspeaker itself. If we could reproduce a orchestra with 110 people in the orchestra with 110 loudspeakers, each sitting in the position of the person who was originally playing, we might get pretty close, but we don't. We mush everything together and it comes out in 2 channels. And the argument has been made for a while, well, all of that does happen, but then it comes into here, and if we can make perfect representations of our ears electronically, then when we reproduce it on a pair of binaural speakers, stereo speakers, it should come out okay. And to some extent, I believe that to be true, but there are so many problems. The Doppler, the crossovers, the fact that speakers are so far from perfect and dynamic. So I think the biggest problems are all to be found in the speakers. That's, if I had to pick something, I would blame it on the speakers. And as we start building speakers, we are going to do our best to get as close as possible to that ideal, and we'll see how close we come. Will we get there? Probably not. But maybe we can just take it a little bit farther. So that's my best thoughts on it. And honest to God, I've been thinking about this for so many years, and I value anyone's input. I've just thought this thing through till my head hurts, but it is a mystery I intend to solve before they plant my ass in the grave. I hope I get there. All right, guys, thanks. Appreciate it. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.